We're going to be in Genesis 25. That's where we're going to start today, and I think we're going to stay in that chapter. Okay, so we have studied in Genesis the phrase, right, that in English it says, these are the generations of. We have 10 of those in all throughout the book. But we saw how 5 of those phrases are actually subordinate to the other 5. So we have 5 of those phrases, these are the generations of, that are actually main phrases. So in effect, the whole book is divided into 5 major sections. And actually 6 if we count then the chapter 1 of Genesis. So we have the introduction, chapter 1, and then we have, we've also said actually that the better translation for that phrase, instead of these are the generations of, that the better translation is these are the, this is what became of. This is what became of. So we have this is what became of heaven and earth, what became of Adam, what became of Noah, etc. And so we have 6 sections in the whole book. Genesis 1 all the way to chapter 2, verse 3. And then beginning in chapter 2, verse 4, then we have the first of those sections. This is what became of heaven and earth. So we have what became of heaven and earth, what became of Adam, and what became of Noah. Then we have what became of Shem and what became of Jacob. So these are the 6 sections of Genesis, the 6 main sections of Genesis. Then we have other sections that are, like we said, they're subordinate. So when it says these are the, this is what became of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So this is subordinate to this is what became of Noah. Same thing with this is what became of Terah, who is the father of Abraham. It's under Shem. So this is what became of Shem is a major section. And then we have 4 sections or 3 or 4 sections that we have under it. We have this is what became of Terah, what became of Ishmael, which is where we're going to start today in chapter 25. This is what became of Isaac, also in chapter 25. And then this is what became of Esau. So we have 5 subordinate, 5 main sections under the phrase, this is what became of. So that makes 10, plus chapter 1, that makes 11. So 11 sections in Genesis. And so here we are all the way in chapter 25. We're going to start in verse 12, where we read that this is what became of Ishmael. In verse 19, this is a short section, because in verse 19, we read this is what became of Isaac. And so these 2 are subordinate sections. So they're not main headings, but they are subheadings, so to speak, under the main heading of Shem. This is what became of Shem. And we saw a couple of weeks ago how one of the reasons for these main sections is because one of these men that are highlighted in these sections, they are almost like a second Adam. So the first one is actually Adam. This is what became of Adam. Then this is what became of Noah, right? The whole earth, it was destroyed. Only one family, only one man and his children. And so God started anew with him. Then this is what became of Shem. And so from Shem, and the whole point of it is that this is the line of the seed of the woman. So the structure of the book serves as a vehicle for the main subject, which is the seed of the woman. And so when we get to Shem, then he is also a main figure into which the seed of the woman comes more into focus into one section of humanity, 1/3, we could even say, right? Because of the three brothers, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And and we also talked about the plot. When you have a narrative, you have a story, you're going to have a plot. If you don't have a plot, then you have something else. It's like you can't watch a movie without a plot. It doesn't exist. You have to have a plot. And we define a plot as a prominent character or a protagonist with a strong desire. There's something that they want to accomplish. For instance, we have in the book of Job. Sometimes it's a little difficult to find the actual plot, because we could say, what would we say is the plot of Job? What is it that he really, 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 really wants? Well, we could say, he wants to be justified, or I'm looking for a better word. He wants to be restored. He wants to be restored, right? That's a possibility. But I think it's actually a little more basic. I think he actually wants God to give him an answer. Mm-hmm. That's I think the being restored, it's inside of the bigger category of wanting an answer. Would you answer me? Would you answer me? Mm-hmm. And so that's the plot. That's another word for plot would be this suspense. What is this? What is suspenseful about this story? What is it that we are kind of doubting? Wow, is this ever going to happen? And we have that in each story. Whether it's a chick flick, is she ever going to marry? Is she ever going to, or is the guy ever going to notice her? So there's always a strong desire that the main character has, and they face a lot of opposition. And Genesis is no different. And so in Genesis, we see in the curse of chapter 3 how God sets up the plot. And what's interesting about Genesis is that the main character is not one person, but it's actually we could probably say it's a character type that is filled in by different people. Different names are going to fill this in, but it's the same character type, which is the seed of the woman. So the seed of the woman early on is Abel, but he gets killed. And so Eve says, you have given me another child to replace the seed that Cain killed. And so now Seth is the seed of the woman. And so we go through the genealogy, and then Noah is the seed, and then his sons, and then Shem, and then we see the conflicts between Abraham and Lot, between Isaac and Ishmael, right? Between Jacob and Esau, even between Joseph and his brothers. So there's always this conflict, this opposition, and the plot is the seed of the woman really going to defeat the seed of the serpent? That's always in every story of Genesis, you're going to come away with the same question: is the seed of the woman ever going to be victorious as God promised? Right? Welcome in, guys. Find a seat and make yourselves at home. We're in Genesis 25. So then we come to, this is what became of Ishmael. And the text, in the book of Genesis, it is going to, let me put it this way. We are reading Genesis, which is a text that Moses wrote for Israel, most likely after coming out of Egypt and before entering the land of Canaan. That's the generation that's reading this book first. And so in that sense, they are not living in the time of Abraham, Isaac, and Ishmael. The reader is not living at that time. The reader is living at least 400 or 500 years later. You know, this was before even Jacob went into Egypt. So we know they were in Egypt for 400 years. So this is approximately 500 years. And so they already know these nations that are listed in Genesis. You know, when they talk about the descendants of the Canaanites, for instance, well, Israel already know. They're not just individuals anymore. They are nations by now when Israel is actually reading this. And that's part of the function of Genesis, to tell Israel, these are the nations that are surrounding you, and to tell through the scriptures, these are the nations that are going to oppose Israel, that are going to fill in the character type of the seed of the serpent. So that we will see the enmity between the descendants of Ishmael and the descendants of Jacob. And they are living it. They're living it. And so that's one of the reasons why we have the list here. So in verse 12, we read, these are the records of the generations of Ishmael, right? This is what became of Ishmael. And we don't have the time to explain. We've done it before, and we have these videos on our website, so you can go and look them up. But we don't have the time to go back and explain why is it that it is a better translation to say, this is what became of. So you'll have to take our word for it right now, and maybe check it for yourself on the older videos. So nonetheless, this is what became of Ishmael. And the focus is always on the seed, the descendants, and the function is to tell Israel, to tell us today, that these are the nations that came out of this person, and are they the seed of the woman or the seed of the serpent? That's the reason why. So here clearly, Ishmael has been kicked out, sent away, because he is not going to inherit. He is not the son of the promise. And we're going to see an allusion here again to the prophetic word spoken over him. So it says that this is what became of Ishmael, Abraham's son, whom Hagar the Egyptian, Sarah's maid, bore to Abraham. And it says, and these are the names of the sons of Ishmael. That phrase, these are the names, it's not at the same level of these are the generations of. This is what became of. It's not at the same level, but it is also an important phrase that is repeated several times. Not only in Genesis, but this is how the book of Exodus begins. These are the names. In fact, what is the Hebrew name for the book of Exodus? Shemot. And that's the Hebrew word for names. And so this phrase gets repeated several times. It's not as important as the Toldot phrase, these are the generations, but it is a phrase to keep in mind. So these are the names of the sons of Ishmael, by their names in order of their birth. So we have the names, Nebayot, the firstborn of Ishmael, and Kedar, and Adbiel, and Mipsam, Mishma, Duma, Masa, Hadad, and Tema, Jetur, Naphish, and Kedama. Whew, this is hard, guys. You need a degree in linguistics to pronounce these things. Yeah. So verse 16. These are the sons of Ishmael, and these are their names. Now notice here, it says, by their villages, by their camps. When we read Genesis 10, we have a similar grammatical construction, but over there in Genesis 10, it says, by their languages and by their nations. But here with Ishmael, it says by their villages and by their camps. The reason is that the word spoken over Ishmael was that they were going to live separate from all his brothers. And what that became is that these are we know these are Arab, they're going to become the Arab people who live in tents as nomads. That's why it doesn't mention their nations or their cities, but it actually, it specified that they live in villages and in camps. So that's part of the fulfillment of the prophetic word spoken over Ishmael. So it says then, 12 princes according to their tribes. In verse 17, these are the years of the life of Ishmael, 137 years. And he breathed his last and died and was gathered to his people. Verse 18, they settled from Havilah to Shur. You remember the word Havilah? It's in Genesis, what chapter? Chapter 2, where it says that the river that comes out of the garden goes around the land of Havilah, right? And we read it like, well, nobody knows where that is. But yeah, actually, we do know where that is. We do know where that is. This is where Ishmael settled. This is actually, here's the land of Israel, here's the land of Egypt, and here's Arabia, Saudi Arabia. And as you go straight, and the text is going to say that, as you go straight from Egypt, remember this is how Moses escaped from Egypt. They went from Egypt straight through into Arabia. So before you get too far here in Arabia, then you had several people living here, and one of the places is Havilah, it's right there, and another one is the name escaped my mind right now. Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, was a Midianite. Okay, that's Midian. So Midian is going towards Arabia, not so far. Arabia will be, continue going that direction. But that area. It's an area that is known. It's not unknown, and that's the point here. So that's where Ishmael is going to settle, and then eventually they're going to become the Arab people, and they're going to conquer and settle in that area. So. And then it says, it mentioned the word Shur, and let's see.
So then that's actually on the eastern side of the Dead Sea?
Yeah. It's if you were to cross the Dead Sea, which is actually even further south, and then you go on to the other side, what will be today Jordan, between Jordan and Saudi Arabia. Looking for this word Shur, because there's in the text here, you have Shur, which is exactly a transliteration from the Hebrew, but then you have Assyria. I think that's how it's translated in most English Bibles. But the Hebrew word for Assyria is actually Ashur. So you have Shur and Ashur, two different peoples. And the word for Ashur It's actually in Genesis 10, and this is where Nimrod. Nimrod is in Genesis 10:11. It says that from that land, he went, which is from Babylon, he goes into Assyria, and he builds Nineveh, in Rehoboth, Ir, and Calah. So that's the same Hebrew word. And then it says in verse 22, Genesis 10:22, the sons of Shem were Elam and Ashur. So my point is that you see the mix of people here. Ashur is the land of Ashur, and the people of Ashur. They are from Shem. They are Semites. Ishmael is actually a Semite because he is He's the son of Abraham, and he comes from Shem. And then the last phrase here, that it says that he settled in defiance of all his relatives. That is also part of the word, prophetic word, blessing / curse. Really, it's not really a blessing over Ishmael. That he is going to be a wild donkey of a man. In the sense of living by himself in the wilderness as a nomad, and then also that he is going to be always in constant fight with his brothers, and that's what this phrase here says, because the word settle actually is a play on words here, because the word nafal, which means to fall. And when this is a word, it's a euphemism that means to kill somebody. So when you fall on somebody, it means you fell with your spear on somebody. You killed them. That's what it means, to kill somebody. So it is. You could say, well, this is where I settle, where I arrived, where I planted the pegs of my tent, so to speak. But I think there's also a play on words. I think they arrived at that land because they conquered that land. It was through fight that they established themselves. And then it says, in defiance. This is in the face of. Literally in the face of. We talk about how we won in the Aaronic blessing, right? May the Lord's face shine upon you. Okay, so this is the opposite. This is in defiance of, meaning I'm going to do this in the presence of God, but I'm not going to do what he wants. I'm going to do what I want in the presence of God. And so this is probably speaking of Ishmael taking over a land, probably going into war and dispossessing people in defiance of God and in defiance of all his relatives. So you went in and you stole this land. Now remember, the context of Genesis is also an end-time context. When Jacob calls his sons at the end of Genesis, and he's going to bless each one of them by name, he says, draw near to me so I can tell you what will come to you, what will happen to you in the end times. And what that means is that we then need to, we get to the end of Genesis and we realize, oh, we've been reading this all wrong. We got to go back and reread Genesis. Because it is at the end of Genesis that we understand that this was all speaking of the end times. Of course, when is the seed of the woman going to defeat the seed of the serpent? In the end times. So Jewish the Jewish view of prophecy is different than the Western view of prophecy. So in the Western thinking, you have one prediction, one prophecy, and one fulfillment. But that's not so in the Hebrew Scriptures or in the Jewish mind. In the Hebrew Scriptures, you have a pattern that is repeated over and over and over again. So for instance, Hanukkah is coming, and in Hanukkah then we remember the Greeks that came in, right, with their main leader, Antiochus. He comes in, he desecrates the temple, he builds an idol, and this Yeshua takes and he says, this is going to happen again. In Matthew 24, he talks about the end times, the desolation, the abomination of desolation. And so we know this is what's going to happen in the end times. But you know, this also happened in the year 70 when the Romans destroyed the temple. Mm-hmm. So Jewish view of prophecy, it is a pattern that gets repeated over and over again versus a one-to-one correspondence. There is, of course, a one fulfillment that is the one that fills in all of the details, right? This is the same as when Peter says, oh, well, what you're seeing here in Acts 2, that's what Joel said. But we see that it doesn't fill all of the details. And it's not a problem, it's not a hermeneutical problem, because this is a Jewish view of prophecy. So Peter is like, yeah, this is the pattern. It's going to be repeated many times. And it is actually repeated several times in the book of Acts, where the Holy Spirit falls like it did in Acts 2, at least in 2, maybe 3 occasions. So the Jewish view of prophecy is a pattern, like not a one-to-one only correspondence. That's how we read Genesis. So here we read of the descendants of Ishmael in defiance of their brothers, stealing land. Those are all patterns that we see today. I don't know if you've heard, but you know, their chant is that they want to go from the river to the sea. Mm-hmm. Right? They want to wipe all of Israel, all the Jewish people, and they want to take every inch of land. Mm-hmm. That's this pattern. Mm-hmm. The sons of Ishmael, the sons of Esau, all of this coming against Israel, the seed of the serpent, and coming against the seed of the woman. All right, so let's keep going here. I want to see if we can finish chapter 25. So this is what is going to become of the sons of Ishmael. In the end times, they will oppose the sons of Jacob, the seed of the woman. So verse 19, now we have, this is what became of Isaac. And remember, it's always about the descendants. So the story of Isaac, what became of Isaac, is actually Esau and Jacob, right? So we go right into it. It says that he's Abraham's son. Abraham became the father of Isaac. And Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean of Padan Aram, the sister of Laban. So the text is giving you a little hint and telling you, tuck this little information right there in your brain. We're going to use it a little later. We're in chapter 25, right? In 24, we just saw Laban in 24. Mm-hmm. And we're going to see him again interacting with Jacob. Mm-hmm. And so he's like, just keep it right there. We're going to come back to it. Put your finger in that chapter. We're going to come back to it. And the text will come back to Laban. Verse 21. Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was barren. So here's the background to it. At the end of the passage, it says that when Isaac was born, when Esau and Jacob were born, Isaac was 60. So it's not like they got married, 3 months later, she can't get pregnant. So it's like, okay, I'm going to go pray. And then 6 months later, she got pregnant. No, 20 years. 20 years, right? All right. But the focus is not on them, remember. At this point, the focus is on their children. So verse 22, but the children, verse 21. Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was barren. And the Lord answered him, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. So now the focus now becomes on the seed. She conceived. So verse 22, but the children struggled together within her. They struggled together. This phrase, this word struggle, it actually means to crush one another. This is violent. This isn't your, did you feel the baby? No. This is like, whoa, look at all this, what's going on here? You imagine the ultrasound, for Rebecca? Wow, that was like a movie going on right there. So this word means to crush, to oppress. Very, very significant. Why? Because the original promise and prophecy of the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent has to do with the heel, doesn't it? Right? You will crush him, the seed of the woman. You will bruise his heel. And the word for heel is akav, from which we get the word Jacob, Yaakov. This is the reason why Jacob is one of the main divisions, sections of Genesis. Why do we have Adam, Noah, Shem, and then Jacob? Why not Abraham? Jacob is also a son of Terah. So, the text gives you Abraham, son of Terah. It gives you Ishmael, descendant of Terah. It gives you Isaac. It gives you Esau. And then it puts Jacob separate. The main focus of the plot, right, of the drama of Genesis, of the suspense of Genesis, of the attack of this war between the seeds, it's actually on Jacob. That's why the text, the Holy Spirit through Moses, is highlighting Jacob, where the seed is going to become the people of Israel that is going to be in this war, this struggle, this crushing, this from the womb, this enmity between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. So we see it right here. And it says, she said, if it is so, why then am I this way? It's kind of funny to read that in English. You're like, okay, what does that mean? But this really is a death wish. This was so intense that she was like, why keep living? And she's going to say so once or twice after this as well. And in this family, you're going to see, we talked about this last year when we went through this same text, that you see a death, what we today would call a generational curse, as suicidal thoughts running through this family. Isaac has it. Rebecca has it. And I believe, Esau is going to have a murderer's spirit about him when he wants to murder his brother. And this shows how the Lord wants to work in families, right? The Lord wants to deliver families
And also,
from this.
from Esau comes the horrible son that they wanted to kill all the Yehudim.
Yes. Ultimately, in the story of Esther, we see Haman.
Haman, yeah.
And you say, boo. Okay, we're not in the season. Wrong season. But yeah, ultimately Haman is a descendant all the way from the through the Amalekites, all the way to this. Same struggle. So then it says at the end of verse 22, so she went to inquire of the Lord. She went to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord's going to give her an answer. But this word inquire is the word darash. Yeshua said, you search the scriptures because you think. So what was wrong was not the searching of the scriptures. It was what they were looking for in the scriptures. Searching the scriptures is the right way to approach scriptures. In other words, in the Jewish world, we don't study scripture, we search the scriptures. And when you search, what you're looking for is you're looking for prophetic connections. That's what you're looking for, a pattern. And so that also is what when you come with your questions to the Lord, that's really what you're doing. You're asking the Lord, how does this connect with what you've told me, what's happening? You're looking for connections. You're inquiring of the Lord. You are searching for how things connect, whether it is a biblical search that you are doing or whether it is in your personal life. How does this connect? So this is searching, and she's coming to the Lord asking, how does this connect? And the Lord's going to give her an answer. Verse 23, the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples will be separated from your body. This word separated is the same word used when at the Tower of Babel, the nations, having been given different languages, they were spread, they were separated. It's the same word. So there is a separation that will take place here. It is also the word that Abraham tells Lot. He says, separate yourself from me. Choose another land. This speaks of the separation between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. And so the Lord is saying this separation will happen. And one people shall be stronger than the other. That's the promise to the seed of the woman.
Amen.
One people will be stronger than the other. And the older, now the Lord is really identifying. I don't want to say his name, but I'm looking at him, right? And the older, they haven't been born yet. So Rebecca had no idea who was going to be the older. Is the guy on this side of the womb or this guy? She doesn't know, right? But when she's giving birth, she is looking who is coming out first. And we know that was a thing when they were born, right? And Esau came first, and Jacob was holding on to. And there's a teaching there. Hopefully we'll get to it real quick. And the older shall serve the younger, and the younger will always struggle to accept this word from God until he finally does. And so at the coming of Yeshua, we see the nations around Israel coming to celebrate the feast.
Amen.
Finally accepting this is not a bad thing. You know, the word for serve here is the same word for worship. Come under Israel to worship God. That's the call. Accept that. Accept that God has an order. And he's made one the older brother. And you're to submit under him so that you can reach your destiny. Verse 24, real quick. We're almost out of time. When her days to be delivered were fulfilled, behold, there were twins in her womb. Now the first came forth. The word came forth is the word yatzah. That's the word for the Exodus. For the Exodus. Yeah, this whole birth was a struggle. An exodus, so to speak, right? And unfortunately, he is going to be a Pharaoh type, oppressing Israel. And it says all over like a hairy garment. He came forth red, all over like a hairy garment. And they named him Esau. And afterward, the word for afterward, we get the word end, the end times. Is a reference to the end times. Every time you read about the end times, it uses this Hebrew word right here, achar. This is the word for the end times. So there's a double meaning right here, a double reference, not a double meaning, but a double reference, right? That this is speaking of the end times. So afterward, his brother came forth. Israel is going to also come forth as an exodus. In the end times, Israel will have a Pharaoh, and it will be the Antichrist. Israel will come forth as in an exodus. And look what it says. And his hand holding onto Esau's heel. In order for Israel to come through in the end times, through this Exodus-like experience, there is a place that non-Jews, there's a role for non-Jews to fulfill, to bring Jacob out of the womb, to bring Jacob out of the Exodus, out of the oppression of Pharaoh. That is the predominantly Gentile church. To come in and bless Israel and stand with Israel. And when the Antichrist comes, guess who's going to be persecuted? Revelation 12. The woman that gives birth to the son, who is the Messiah, the woman is Israel. Right. And then it says, and the rest of her offspring, the one who hold on to the testimony of Yeshua and to the word of God. These are Gentile believers. They have a role to be there for Israel's support so Israel can come through that Exodus. And it is all right there in the birth of Jacob.